Yeah. We are recording on Friday, November 14th, 2025 at 11:05 a.m. Eastern Time with Mr. Larry Burns, who you came on here first in 2020 and, right when the show was getting started. And I think you came on again in 2021. Now it is November 2025, and you first came on to talk about your book Autonomy and really kind of, the early days of self-driving and AI. And for everybody listening, the link to the book is in the description. It's on Audible. It's fantastic. But I was just telling you about the podcast beforehand, and you're telling me about your daughters and their business. And I can say this as somebody who successfully was accepted to medical school out of college. Getting into medical school is far easier than building and sustaining your own company online. And I'll clarify it with this. It's difficult to get into medical school, but the path is there. If you score in the X percentile, if you take the classes, you do the research, the shadow the doctors, you get a good, personal statement, you get some letters of recommendation. It's difficult, but the path is there, and tens of thousands of students do it every year. It's a lot like climbing Mount Everest. It's difficult, but the path is there. There's no path here. You don't even know if you're on a mountain. You're like, am I going up or should I be going down? And then you're like, you don't even know if you're on Earth. You're like, what's the gravity here? Like, and it's the only real lesson I've learned. Well, I've learned a lot, but I think the defining, if I had to boil it down, I would say it's pretty simple. You got to get 8 hours of sleep every night, um, and you have to be okay with uncertainty, not lose your head, and understand that it's a marathon, but it's a bunch of people who've never run a marathon versus a bunch of people who've never run a marathon. Meaning, it doesn't matter if it takes you 30 hours to do it. You you just have to outlast everybody else. And so, but I'm going to hand it over to you because you're a fascinating guest and nobody wants to hear my story for the trillionth time. So, Mr. Burns, could you please introduce yourself for everybody?
Yes, I'm Larry Burns, and I'm what I call a business advisor or an executive advisor to a number of different companies. Having previously worked for General Motors for a number of years, I led research and development and planning at GM. So my role there really was to think 5 to 10 years out. And after I left GM in 2009, I continued to do that on behalf of probably over 80 clients now to help them think 5 to 10 years out about where's the future of autonomous driving headed, where's the future of energy for transportation headed, where's the future of manufacturing and innovation headed. So I advise companies on those subjects.
And again, your book is fascinating, and the extrapolation and the predictions are, to use the med school analogy, I just have to get through the semester. You just got to ace OChem. Don't worry, but just ace OChem. With the podcast, it's more of a, what am I doing this week? But it's 3, 6 months out. Where are we going? Where are we shifting? What you were talking about in the book, and again, for future listeners, it's 2025 now, and in your book, it's talking about, one day you're mentioning 9/11. That's a different level of projection, which the only way I could, in my limited experience, compare it to would be something like not even defense contractors, but rather DARPA, where they're looking way out and there's not necessarily a profit motive. And I believe their mission statement is to build the vast weapon systems of tomorrow. That is where do you find that in terms of looking out? Because there's a distinct difference between 5 years and 20 years. It gets alien.
Yeah, it's a great question, Tommy. I'm glad you asked it. I was named head of planning for General Motors in 1995, 96 timeframe. And that was the product plan, the capacity plan, the business plan, all of that. And what I inherited in the planning function at GM was a process that tried to put a 10-year plan in place with actual numbers. So, for example, they were trying to predict how many Chevy Malibu two doors with four-cylinder engines would we sell 10 years from now. And it also took us 59 weeks to do the plan. So we had to start the plan for next year before this year even ended. And as an engineer and as a scientist, I said that was ludicrous. Nobody can predict that. You can't predict your way to the future. I gathered up a bunch of data, showed my boss, a guy named Rick Wagner, who subsequently became the CEO and chairman of GM, that any decision made on, years, 3 through 10 of that plan were fiction because the data just didn't support any certainty. So he said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to do real-time planning. So I want to adjust the plan immediately if things change. I want the first year to be the budget, the second year to be a placeholder for the next budget, and then combine the next 3 years into a sense of where we're headed." And he bought into that. So the point I'm making is you cannot forecast your way to the future. There's an awful lot of business schools who tend to teach MBAs what I call spreadsheet engineering. They're always trying to put a better number into a spreadsheet. And I lose my patience with that because I don't think a better number in a spreadsheet helps. What really helps is thinking big, starting small, learning fast, so that when you're ready to scale, that's when the big money gets spent. You can scale smart. Think big, learn fast, and scale smart. And that's how you have to do it. You have to learn your way to the future. So, as part of that process, you have to think real hard about what do you think is going to be inevitable. That's a different question than an economic forecast about GDP. The joke is that an economist is someone who can explain tomorrow what they predicted yesterday didn't come true today. And that's what they try to do. And those forecasts never come true. But you need to have a sense of what could be inevitable. And the only way I think you can do that is to have a seat at the table with the companies creating knowledge, the cutting edge of insight. So someone might ask a question, will autonomous vehicles happen? To have some industry analyst answer that is a very different answer than to ask Chris Urmson or Dmitry Dolgov, the pioneers who've actually, Brian Selesky, who actually have done this. And these are the people who know how to answer those questions. So you've got to get that deep insight. That's why I believe research and development organizations are really important. It gives you a chance to get a seat at the table with these cutting edge knowledge creators. And by the way, investors in small startups can get a seat on their boards and get a window into that as well. So it's about learning, understanding what could be inevitable, and then figuring out when's it going to tip. When is that magic moment when the value exceeds the price, so people want it, and the price exceeds the cost, so companies want to produce it. And so you focus on that tipping point, not some 20-year estimate, and you focus on what has to be true to get there and how do you learn the way forward with as low a tuition as you can possibly pay. That's a long answer, but
No,
that's
it's
what I've learned,
brilliant.
Tommy, over the years.
No, it's brilliant. It's yeah, I like that. The what is inevitable. The only thing I can only way I could like two quick examples would be I always mention this, and I probably said it to you before. There's a popular mechanics article, I think from the year 1900, and it's predictions for the year 2000.
Yeah.
When you first look at them, you're kind of laughing because it's all this like steampunk, Jules Verne. Every home will have their own personal hot air balloon, and you're like, that's stupid. And it's you will people, family members in the neighborhood will have little that look like a phone, and they will be connected through a long tube of mirrors to look at each other's faces. Uh, Teachers will put a big, almost blender in an industrial meat grinder in the middle of a classroom, and they'll throw books into it, and all the students have caps attached to it. And you're looking at this, and you're like, come on. Firefighters will have leather wings, and that is how they will put out, high story fires. But if you really start to look at it, how it came true was laughably, again, it's so long ago, they're not clear, they're not even rendering. It's they're watercolor. It's 12 years before the Titanic. But okay, what is firefighters with leather wings? That's the ability to put out fires in skyscrapers. We have that. We have, fire trucks with ladders. We also have 747s that can drop fire retardant. All right. What is a blimp in every home? Is it a personal jet? No, no, no. It's access to air travel by the common man. You can go get a plane ticket for a couple $100. Right now, We could theoretically be doing, instead of on an iMac, you and I could be talking over an iPhone doing FaceTime. That's a long tube with mirrors in it. Audible, where I listen to your book. That's kind of decentralized learning. You put it in a big blender and you put on the cap. The cap is ear pods. So you look at it and you go, laughably incorrect, but also almost perfectly on point. Now the difference is, well, how do I make money on it? Well, there's 100-year gap. So, but is that anywhere close
Well,
to what you're
I think,
describing?
yeah, I think what you're really hitting on is if you really want to be successful as an innovator, you got to have laser focus on value creation. I call that making value. That's not just making things, but really making value. And you do that through the experiences that your customers have. So the auto industry, when I was, a senior executive in the industry, and that sort of ran the time frame from about 1990 to 2009, that business model assumed that a customer is willing to pay $40,000 for a new car. Today, that's over 50,000. Leave it parked 95% of the time, be willing to stop to buy gas, get out of the car, get their hands dirty on the pump, their shoes, gasoline odor on it, use their time doing that, search for parking. And lo and behold, Tommy, there were a lot of negatives about the ownership and operation of an automobile. And the innovation opportunity was to get rid of those negatives and turn them into positives. So you say, where did self-driving cars come from? Well, people were telling us, screaming that they didn't like to drive because they were willing to get distracted when they were driving. People would drive 70 miles an hour on an expressway in a 4 or 5,000 pound machine texting. And so you say, are they bad people? No, they're telling me that driving is the distraction. So the opportunity is, hey, let's get rid of driving and let's create a future where the car can drive itself. The person isn't tethered to the steering wheel any longer. And lo and behold, that gets you a very exciting opportunity to redesign not just the car, but the entire system. And that's why I get excited about that. The value creation opportunity that comes with the inevitability of autonomous cars. I estimated in my book to be a $4 trillion per year disruption in the US economy. That 4 trillion is going to get redistributed somehow because that's really what people are paying to own and operate cars and use their time to drive them each year in the United States. So the value creation opportunity is what really needs to guide your innovation thinking. That's why that tipping point is so important because once that value exceeds the price that you're going to charge for it, people are going to jump for it. Again, the proliferation of these, it's unbelievable. I like to think about what I had on my desk in 1980 that does what this does. Yeah, I had maps, I had phones, I had compasses, I had video cassette recorders, I had cameras, on and on it goes. A massive pile of hardware. Every one of those products needed to be designed, engineered, and sourced. The parts needed to be stored in warehouses for service purposes. And people get all up in arms about the energy requirement for AI, but think about how much more sustainable this is than that pile of parts that were on my desk in 1980. It's remarkable. So as long as innovators stayed laser focused on value creation and asked themselves over and over what has to be true to deliver that value, and work on those things and do that very efficiently. Don't bet the bank. Don't get way out over your skis and spend billions of dollars trying to scale something that wasn't quite ready to be scaled because you're going to be disappointed by that. And I think what's happened with EVs here is an example of what we're going through. I think there are a lot of people trying to force the scaling of electric vehicles a little bit before they were ready to truly be scaled with the value proposition. A lot of people like the EVs. I think Tesla's proven that their customers love them. I get excited about them because there's going to be half as many parts in an electric vehicle versus a combustion vehicle. Einstein said the best design is the simplest one that works. It's going to give us all kinds of design opportunities. But to try to scale that with $7,500 incentives when you didn't have the charging stations in place and the batteries were still too expensive, that wasn't going to solve climate change. And lo and behold, you get U.S. manufacturers doing Silverado electric vehicles and Ford F-150 EVs. They're adding 2,500 pounds to the vehicle. The Detroit Lions offensive line weighs 2,100 pounds. So every time you get in your F-150 EV to go to the store to buy a gallon of milk, you're thinking you're helping the environment because it's emitting any zero. You're taking the entire line of the Detroit Lions with you in your vehicle. So I think people got over their skis a bit with the EVs. That doesn't mean EVs are going to go away. I think enough has happened with the learning, the customer feedback, the design opportunities, the value creation that comes from an EV, where we'll get to that tipping point. But I think we just got out in front of it a little bit.
Yeah, my dad was in the poultry industry for his entire career, and he would always say, "You want to be on the cutting edge, but not the bleeding edge. Like you want to be able to compete with the other, the other big, like Cargill, Tyson, but you don't want to be, yeah, you don't want to be doing that DARPA level. You don't want to be doing that DARPA level of let's, let's grow this poultry with, whatever, this feed source or this, but you don't want to get to let's 3D print protein. It's like that's say let DARPA do that. They don't have shareholders. Like let
Well, yeah, and I admire DARPA so much.
oh yeah.
Yeah, as we discussed before, DARPA was the catalyst for self-driving cars. They did the Desert Challenge and then they did the Urban Challenge in 2007. General Motors sponsored Carnegie Mellon, so I got very involved with that, being head of R&D. And Carnegie Mellon won the race. And when we went up to receive the $2 million prize, I jokingly say GM needed the money because we were going bankrupt. But when we went up to get the check, I asked Tony Tether, who was the head of DARPA, what's next? He said, there's not a next for this. The commercial world, the private sector has to run with this now. You guys have proven it's viable. Now it's a matter of companies stepping up and really putting the kind of learning and resources behind this to make it possible. Google self-driving cars emerged from that. I was able to advise them for about 11 years, which was a great experience. And now I think what we're seeing is the inevitability of autonomous driving. I'm not talking about what some people call level five, where under every circumstance the car can drive itself. Today, airlines can't fly under every circumstance, or snowstorms and weather conditions that prevent that. And quite honestly, if you're going over Loveland Pass in a snowstorm at midnight, you probably shouldn't be out there driving. I'm talking about a level of autonomous driving that most all of the time when you're in the vehicle, you truly can not be part of the process of driving the car. Once you accept that inevitability, which I do, and this is what I don't think people are paying enough attention to, what can you now do? You can totally redesign these over-the-road tractors for these 80,000 pound trucks. Think about the parts on one of those tractors or trucks, let's say, windshields, seats, air conditioning systems, sound systems, all of the stuff that comes because you have a human driver in it will go away. And now suddenly the parts that go away cost more than the parts you're going to add to make it autonomous. So everybody gets up in arms about autonomous systems being expensive, not when you pull this design thread. And what really excites me on the people movement side of this is the ability to start tailoring the machines we ride around in to the trip characteristics. I did a calculation, Tommy. I think this is really important. There's 275 million cars in the United States, and they each have about 5 seats. If you realize that cars are parked 95% of the time, and then when they're used, they average 1.5 people in those 5 seats. That's equivalent to 12,700 University of Michigan football stadiums sitting empty every day in the United States. Why is this? Everybody buys a car for their extreme uses, not for their typical uses. So the size of the car, the size of the battery, all of that mass is being designed for the extreme or occasional trip, not the everyday trip. I think autonomous driving and AI and connected cars will take us to a world where the vehicles can be tailored to the trip. So if I'm going from my home to my country club on roads that don't exceed 40 miles an hour and it's a 15-minute trip, doesn't it make sense for me maybe to be in something that weighs 1,500 to 2,000 pounds rather than 4 to 5,000 pounds? Maybe something that has two seats rather than six seats. Maybe something that has a top speed of 50 miles an hour rather than 110 miles an hour. So I think we're just getting started. Once people realize autonomous truly is real, and it is, they're going to start really, really getting creative on the design opportunities for the systems that define how we live. And I get very, very excited about that future, Tommy. I think it's going to be great.
I like that idea of they're all designed for that upper limit of extreme use. And it's first thing I think of is like, yeah, not every 747 needs to be Air Force One. It's
Right.
right. Not
Yeah.
every not every 747 needs to be EMP resistant with, IR flares and bulletproof windows and with a enclosed, I think every Air Force One has a surgery room. They don't need, terabit uploads to NSA satellites to launch nuclear weapons. It would be nice, but you
Well,
can also just
yeah.
go on a 747.
There's a great writer, Clayton Christensen. He wrote this book, Innovator's Dilemma. And he was a Harvard professor, just a marvelous person and educator. But he always argued mature products get way over specified. They do way more things than what really is required for the fundamental value. And what happens in innovation is someone comes along underneath that and creates a new specification that's much simpler, much lower cost, but still creates value, and it disrupts the mature industry. And so today, when you look at your typical car, it really, really is over-designed in so many ways. And I believe maybe not in the United States, but in some of these other markets around the world, you will see this disruption. So, the debate continues to go on about, no kidding, what's really going on with electric vehicles in China? Well, they do have a vehicle called the BYD Seagull that sells for about $11,000 US equivalent. It's a four-seat electric vehicle. It's really, really impressive car. And so China could see a world, given that they have so many cities with over 20 million people in them, and there's a continued migration and suburbanization going on. They may be the ones that pioneer these two-seat pods that are just fine for your everyday travel. And I want to emphasize this, Tommy. I'm not saying to people that they can't own an Escalade. Please don't interpret what I'm
Yeah.
saying that one can't go out and buy an Escalade. But the fact that the Escalade weighs 6,000 pounds and upwards to 10,000 if it's an electric, that has a side effect on everybody else. That mass of that Escalade mixed in with traffic, that's kinetic energy, mass half times mass times velocity squared. That has a side effect for people who would rather move around in a smaller vehicle that's tailored to their trip requirements. So in essence, what we're saying is the person who really wants to own and use a really big, powerful vehicle, have at it, but at least be responsible for the side effects you're putting into the system, which are tied to the mass of your vehicle and its horsepower. So again, I don't think the solution is to force solutions on people. I think people should have choice, but I think their choices should reflect their impact on other people, just like secondhand smoke. The
Yeah.
person smoke, but their choices were impacting other people, so they have to smoke outside or smoke at home and private.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some people, and I know I do, without even thinking, kind of get that knee-jerk reaction of I'm not even a car guy, but like like one day, whenever the podcast, I've always wanted like an H1 Hummer, just a big blocky stupid thing, because I think they're so cool. I just think they're just
They're, they're cool. And you know what? People love horses still today.
yeah,
And really beautiful, fast horses are admired and they get to race and they can race
yeah,
and enjoy that. And if you really think the electric Hummer is a really cool vehicle, hey, go enjoy it in a setting that has been designed and optimized for.
Yeah.
But geez, to jump in it to go get a gallon of milk on
Yeah.
25-mile-an-hour streets that go by schools, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah, no, I've got a 15-year-old Honda Civic. That is fine for everything. Like, but yeah, one day I'd like a giant metal monster war machine because I'm a guy and I don't know, it seems cool, but um that does seem to be the yeah, what you said about excuse me, what you said about horses. It's like turn of the century Manhattan, part of the scaling was I think it was I think Chicago had the first skyscraper. It's like 10 or 11 stories and
I think so. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
they had
yeah,
a couple, and then New York took it and ran with it.
yeah.
And early on, like the bottom floor was the most desirable floor. If you had money, that was the penthouse. You don't have to walk upstairs, and then it flips with the elevator, and then once they load bearing walls, things didn't need to be a pyramid once they steel and stuff. And very quickly, they were like, all right, Manhattan's gonna go insane. And like one of the constraints, talking about crazy Woolworth building, I think the Singer building, and then Chrysler Empire was like, excuse my French, but the phrase was like, what are we gonna do with all this horse shit? There's so much, and like if you look at it now and say, okay, we want to build this new skyscraper, they're putting up a bunch in Billionaires Row. What are we gonna do with that? You'd look back and be like, what are you talking about? The horse shit? What are you talking about? And it's because there was so much to remove that it comes to what you're saying about the complete revamping and reimagining. So like once you're within one paradigm, you do need to hyper evolve within that paradigm. But in a popular mechanics article I remember reading in high school, it's probably like 2005, they're talking about the F-22 Raptor and what would replace it 20 years from now, which is where we are now. And they had a quote from the Secretary of the Air Force, and they're like, so what is the seventh gen? Like 2030, 2040. And it's like, what people need to understand is, yes, we love the idea, the fighter jock. We always have that. But ultimately, it's about military preparedness. And if in the future, the best weapon is a button you push and all the planes fall out of the sky, that will be the Air Force. And he's like, you have to look at what does it do? What does it do functionally? And as we get to drones, you kind of the Reaper, the Predator. Okay, sure, you gotta watch it and control it. But as you kind of get more and more wild, you do have that moment of the first thing is, okay, well now we can do more G forces. And then you go, you could probably get rid of the seat. But even when they're building humanoid drones, you have to start asking, wait, does it have to be bipedal? Can it look like an octopus? And once you do that, that's when you realize like, oh, we're at an event horizon. So it's okay, the car self-driving, let's say it doesn't need let's say the tractor trailers don't need a human in it. Get rid of the seat. When you start going like, well, does it have to be that long? Can it be twice as long? Can it be wider? Can it be like a weird egg?
These
Like,
are fantastic questions because
yeah,
part of the reason you have 80,000-pound loads and the over-the-road truck is as large as it is you're trying to spread the cost of the labor for driving the load over as many pounds or as many cubic feet as you possibly can. So now you don't have that cost any longer in the vehicle. Your loads can be much smaller, quite honestly, Tommy. And that means you may not need to have as many warehouses and distribution centers and the direct routing. And if these loads are smaller, maybe the bridges don't have to be built to such a extreme standard and the cost of the roadways can be adjusted. But the other very, very interesting thing going on today is there's no way you can save as much time with the speed increase as you can save by not having to take the trip. So let me give an example. I mentioned my daughters are in a food influencer a business that they created. And each week they send out recipes, and they sent out a recipe one week calling for tandoori seasoning. And my wife and I didn't have it. We wanted to make it the next day. So there's a market about 3 miles from my house where ordinarily I would have jumped in the car, driven to the market, looked for the seasoning, bought it, and came home. That probably would have been a 30-minute experience. Parking the car, walking in, finding it, buying it, coming home, driving, and it would have cost me 6 miles out of pocket cost. That's about $5, and my time. I go to Amazon and I find the tandoori seasoning for $4.80 and it's on my porch in 16 hours. There's no amount of speed increase between my home and that market that could save me as much time as I saved by spending 5 minutes on the internet to find the tandoori seasoning. Now, someone might say, how can you justify a 3 ounce bottle of spice delivered on your porch by a 200-pound driver in a 7,000-pound vehicle? Well, he's also dropping
Yeah,
off on
it's
the neighbor and the neighbor and the
yeah,
neighbor and the
economies
neighbor.
of scale. Like
It's
it,
almost like that's the new form of public transit. The Amazon delivery person is almost because all those trips were eliminated. All the trips that people would have made that the e-commerce people are making for us have been eliminated. So I think the other thing that's really on my horizon that excites me a lot is what I call virtual access. We're meeting today virtually, you and I are. And I used to take 40 business trips a year, and now that's down to below 10 because I can get so much done with virtual access. Telehealth. I just had a physical at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and I had a follow-up meeting with my doctor
yeah,
telehealth. I didn't have to travel again for that trip. Online learning, remote work. I know the jury's still out on remote work, but even if just one day a week, you've got the flexibility to work from home, the ramifications on congestion are huge. So this whole virtual access and how it interplays with physical access, which requires transportation, is really going to define the auto industry of the future and the transportation systems of the future. And it's playing out big time now. And when you roll AI into that, there's a new kind of access. It's access to insight and the speed at which you can get insight when you have a question on your mind. Now, you got to be careful. There's a lot of fake information out there, so you have to be educated and informed in order to judge whether the answers you're getting back pencil. But my gosh, the world is going to be exciting. I really wish I was 25 again, knowing what I know, to participate in this transition to the future of access and the way it's going to change the way people live and the role of transportation and vehicles in that world. I absolutely think the sustainability challenges are easy to handle. I think the design opportunities to do like this for many, many other things that we use in our daily life to really, really get designs to their ultimate simplicity, to their true value creation sweet spots. And young people are going to get to participate in that. And that's going to be fantastic.
yeah. Even in terms of just what you can get done, and I mean, I've done one in-person podcast, and even that was because the guy lived nearby, and it was like, okay, yeah, sure, let's come hang out. Every single this is episode 1887. They're all done on Zoom. Most of the people I've never met, I probably won't meet. You know, how did I get your book? I downloaded it on Audible. How did I contact? I don't even remember how I emailed you.
Yeah.
All this stuff is what it does, is I think, again, in my very unexperienced life, is it lowers the barrier to entry.
Yes.
And okay, like I splurged and got a good camera, but I can just do the iMac camera. It's a nice microphone. It's 500 bucks, but I bought it in December 2020. Okay. Other than that, all right, I have a couple terabyte hard drives, right? I have them all stored, but it's all on YouTube,
Yeah.
Rumble, Spotify. Cost me nothing to upload. I get the guests through email, which costs me nothing.
Yeah.
We do a Zoom.
Tommy, where do you live?
I'm in Portland, Maine.
Okay, so you're in Portland, I'm in Michigan.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you would have reached out and said, Larry, could you fly to Portland to my studio so we could do this live? I don't think we would have had this engagement.
No.
I would have set aside the time for that trip.
No, that people ask me, they're like, "How come you don't do it in studio?" I'm like, "Listen, if you're Joe Rogan and you can offer, hey, 100 million people are going to hear you, yeah, you
Yeah,
get on that. You cancel work for a week, and I, but I just look at it very honestly. I'm 35. I've got 50,000 subscribers, but if I ask people, hey, can I get an hour of your day on any day you choose, and you know,
yes,
comfort of your own room, you as soon as this is over, I mean, where are you? You got to get a flight back." No, I mean, I pause the show all the time. People go use the restroom. It's your restroom. You know, I have no idea if you're wearing slippers or dress shoes, and I don't care. I have a blanket right here. Like you do all, and like when I do that, Well, then, and it's very, very flexible. If you can't do, yeah, I can do later. Well, then I look at some of the guests I've had on. Apollo 16 astronaut Charlie Duke. He's one of 3 men alive who's walked on the moon. Roseanne Barr, General Mike Flynn, Mike Durant, the Black Hawk Down pilot. Had on a woman that dated Lee Harvey Oswald. Like some of the guests I get on, yeah, best case, best case, excuse me, Rogan could get them. But it's like, well, when people ask, how do I get them? And I know it sounds cheesy, but I'm like, dude, send an email. If they say no, they say no. But a lot of it is, what I'm asking of people is very, very little. I, and if people are hesitant, I'm like, hey, let's do 15 minutes, whatever you want. And it allows me to do this. And of course, then well, then how do you do it? Well, then you just got to dial up the elbow grease for 6 years. But I think if you were to just take that in general concept and apply it to something like autonomous cars, the barrier to entry falls down. And then you're at this event horizon. Well, what is the barrier to entry to anyone with an hour of their day can start a podcast? I don't know. Look at the last 10 years. How is that? I mean, how much of the last or and current election cycles are determined by people with big Twitter accounts as
Yeah.
opposed to Fox
To
News or
that point, yeah,
CNN?
yeah, to that point on barriers to entry, when you look at an automobile, when you were designing combustion-based vehicles that were human-driven to meet the regulations that emerged in the 1970s on safety, emissions, and fuel economy, you really had to have deep knowledge to optimize that vehicle design because you're trying to get the engine calibrated for emissions under a wide range of temperature and humidity conditions, plus the different forms of acceleration. You're trying to get fuel economy, which can compete with cleanliness in the drive cycle. That requires really deep know-how. You go to an electric vehicle with no emissions, you don't have to have that certification. You go with an electric vehicle where the electricity is coming from a variety of sources. The efficiency isn't quite as critical as it was in a combustion vehicle, although it's still important because of the mass of the batteries and things. But suddenly the barriers to entry on designing a vehicle drop amazingly. And I read recently that there's 42 electric vehicle manufacturing companies in China. And you go, how the heck could that happen? The barriers to entry are much lower than they are with a combustion vehicle. Then you get to autonomous driving, and Waymo is on record now. Takitra, their CEO, made a statement that they are 5 to 10 times safer than human drivers. Suddenly the physics of the crash is going to change, and all of that know-how on occupant protection is going to come down because the crashes aren't going to occur at near the severity or frequency as they have in the past. So that barrier to entry drops. Now you can let the real design and excitement comes in, and it comes in like fashion. And we can get transportation back to its fashion roots. So your vehicle is something you wear rather than
Hmm.
something you drive. And when I go to the country club in this two-person pod, I want to be the envy of all the other members of my club because of what I'm wearing when I come in. And fashion's always been a major motivator for marketing and design. So I think these lowering of the barriers to entry that come with the combination of autonomous connected electric vehicles, a deep understanding of physical access and virtual access, really, why are you traveling and what are the purposes of your trip? It's just going to unleash this explosion in design innovation, which makes for a very, very exciting next century of how people are going to be able to live and engage and move around and interact and do what they want to do.
And I was thinking, I wonder how much it's going to affect something like, just-in-time delivery and things like Amazon distribution centers or fulfillment centers, I guess Walmart distribution centers. Because even then, like that's been greatly, if you look at the presence of Walmarts in cities versus mom and pop stores, and then you look at the installments of the fulfillment centers, which are even bigger and more sparsely placed. I mean, can you reduce it even more? I mean, at what
Yeah.
point do you have Amazon West Coast facility and Amazon East, and then that's it?
Well, where your question gets very, very exciting. I had a fascinating discussion with Fred Smith. He was the founder of FedEx, and
Okay.
FedEx was one of my clients several years ago. And Fred was talking about 3D printing, and I'm going, Fred, why would FedEx be interested in 3D printing? He said,
Shipment.
well, we've got all these FedEx stores, and we could put 3D printers in every store. And rather than shipping the parcel, we can
There it
ship
is.
data, and we can print your tennis shoes, we can print your blue jeans, we can print your shirt. Who knows what we're going to be printing for you? Now, he was clearly a visionary, but Fred, when he created FedEx, I think logistics were something on the order of 14% of GDP. Now, don't quote me on these exact numbers. We had the deregulation of the freight industry in the early 1980s. The Reagan administration did that. And now I think logistics, which is the storage and movement of all the goods behind the economy, I think it's down around 5 or 6% of GDP. So Fred was going to take that to the next level to not even ship physical things, ship
Mm.
data and print things nearby. And you might say, well, geez, 3D printing, it hasn't quite, conquered the world yet, but more and more materials are being created that can be 3D printed. Processing speeds and storage capacities of the compute systems are going up. The robotics are going up. Hold on to your hat. That's going to get really interesting.
Yeah. When people, I get it if a technology hasn't even been pioneered by DARPA, where you can get a little like, yeah, maybe. But I don't know if you've seen it, but it's almost like it's like a comical threshold of AI video generation is the Will Smith eating spaghetti test. Like a couple years ago, and this is I think is like whatever was free, obviously, if you know you're a $1 trillion Hollywood corporation, you can AI anything. But it was like what was free in 2019. And it's, the video is like 380p or 360p. It looks like a weird mix of claymation and watercolor, and it kind of looks like Will Smith, and like one eye is looking the other way, and he's eating a bowl of spaghetti. His hand is morphing with the spaghetti. It gets to like bad acid trip sort of feeling, and then as it goes on, it's like, well, how does it look next year? And I was like, if you look at it now, it's like 8K resolution, 240 FPS. And it's like upward, and it's like scanned from the most recent picture of Will Smith 11 hours ago, and the plate and the ceramic and the physics, it's imperceptible. And so when I look at something like you said, like 3D printing, yeah, that's not there yet. Yeah, not yet, not yet. Uh, but there's a lot of guns that are printed, and guns that they're not exactly uh, they don't exactly have large tolerances and don't undergo pressure. It's the exact opposite. It's a Swiss watch, and you're exploding something. And if you can print that, yeah, you're on a warpath. Give it another 5 years. Give the Will Smith eating spaghetti another 5 years. I
Oh,
mean, we're hurtling towards it. And what you said about logistics just made me think of something like, yeah, well, I mean, what's the quote? Amateurs study tactics, professionals study logistics in terms of war. And then you think about the U.S. Defense Logistics Agency, and it's less about how many, cutting edge stealth bombers do you have versus how quickly can you get 1,000 Marines with 10,000 MREs and, a bunch of sandbags to any place in the world. Logistics win the war.
yeah.
That
Oh,
makes me think how much of these logistics things we're talking. I'm sure the DoD is up to their ears in looking at that and cutting costs.
I just finished reading a 3 volume series on World War II. There was one book about North Africa, one book about Sicily and Italy, and the third book was D-Day on to Berlin. And boy, logistics. It was all about logistics, Tommy. And oil, certainly you needed oil to be part of the logistics system, but it was about everything behind the infantrymen that enabled the forward movement of the Allied forces toward the end goal. So you're absolutely right. So I think what's so exciting about the future is um, this potential of connecting the dots. I think everybody should be looking at these innovations not as self-standing silos, But what happens when you combine AI with autonomous, with breakthroughs in biology, with breakthroughs in materials, and obviously the breakthrough in compute capability, and begin to connect those dots. And I really encourage people who like to think about the future, think about it through the lens of how people live their lives, through the everyday, very practical, common sense aspects of what do we do every day and what are the things that could be improved where our daily experiences become more convenient and better and more enjoyable. Because I do think as we pull this thread of AI through the economy, we're going to ask what new jobs will surface. And I think we're on a path toward what many people, not just myself, refer to as the experience economy. And so being able to design experiences and understand the emotional and physical aspects of those experiences and the virtual aspects will be exciting. So I think in a world where we tend to get inundated with a lot of negative news, I am very, very optimistic about the future because of its ability to solve some really big challenges that the world faces with respect to poverty, with respect to food, with respect to um, know-how and experiences in life, and to be able to participate in those solutions is going to be a lot of fun. And I think the market economy is the thing that can scale them. I don't know of a better way to scale things than to create something that people really like and at a price that they can afford at a cost that companies want to produce it. Then you're going to get to scale fast.
Hmm.
These big problems that we're wrestling with are large, large, large problems. So you've got to have scalable solutions. So why not make those scalable solutions things that people really like that also happen to be sustainable and healthier and other things. So it's a really exciting time for people who are engineers or scientists or are technically inclined who want to participate and these kinds of solutions.
Yeah, it's it seems like the flow chart in the most basic, making it up as I go. You have that DARPA level. We got to start doing it way before it's profitable, like the space race or the internet. And then, well, what's next? And they go, nothing's next. Okay, now the private corporations, you bring it up and they start pushing it. And then the last is when it catches on to the peasants like me. We're not, why am I interested in it? At the same time, you know, AI is increasing rapidly. Well, it's also because a lot of it's like fun now. You just put in an image generation, and now the average person is getting involved with it. You could say, what do self-landing rocket, you get it in theory. It brings down the cost of kilogram to orbit because you're not destroying the rocket. Okay. But then you could also say it drastically reduces the cost to throw up, a trillion Starlink satellites. Okay, well, what does that do? Well, why are those up there? Because now the average person's like, oh, dude, I can get internet on my farm. And once you do that, then the real, the fish taking the water, zzz, it really starts going. I think that's what it is. It's gonna once it gets to the average person, and now the average person is one horse out of a billion horses pulling a carriage. That's when it starts to accelerate, and it does seem whether or not it's a grand design, whether it's a bunch of people controlling it, whether it's God, whether it's a natural emergent phenomena, the the kind of thing you can look back over all of human history, but really even just the last century. It's like regardless of country, regardless of who's in office or whatever, in general, it seems like infant mortality goes down. You food and water based illnesses goes down. Life expectancy goes up. Percentage of people dying from war goes down. I think average IQ, or at the very least access to education, you know, spreads more. That general theme seems to be the improvement of kind of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Oh,
That seems to be the meta theme.
you nailed it, and I'm glad you used the word access in your narrative because it's really about letting people have access to those opportunities and make the best of them. So it's just an amazing world. The assumptions that built the world from the 1900s to the 2000s have been turned upside down completely with the digital age. And there was a great book written by a guy named Harold Evans. It's called They Made America. It's about innovation from about 1870 to 1950.
My grandpa had that book. I
Yeah,
remember
that
it.
is a
Yeah.
wonderful book. And now I think there's a remade America that needs to be written from about 1970, which is generally when people start to clock on the digital age through to about 2025. And I think what you're going to see is the foundation that was laid in that time that will define how people live their lives for the next 50 years. And we need to make the best of that, Tommy, because I think it really offers some great opportunities to just make things more enjoyable, more sustainable, healthier, and a bright future.
And I think perhaps most importantly, we'll wrap it up because I got another show in a couple minutes. Is what you said about being excited, and that's one quote I do like from Elon Musk. I know some people love him and hate him. I don't care. Is you should have a future, whether it's in your own life or in general, that you're excited to work towards. It doesn't mean life. It's the human condition. It's Buddhism. Life is suffering. You always got. I get all that. But even with this podcast, as stressful as it is, it's also, man, it's anxiety inducing, it's terrifying, but it's exciting. Like, what does next year bring? Who am I talking to? How does it change? And in that same way, it's okay, maybe you don't love your job, but then there's personal, you're growing your hobby, or your child's growing up, or you're getting into the gym. You've never been in the gym before, but now you feel good, and it's, you're building muscle, and it feels good to enact change at the society wide or the civilizational wide or species wide. Is you got to look forward to it. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have all the trials and tribulations. It's, World War II ends and the next thing you get into is the Cold War. It's like, yeah, that's there, but it has to be at some level exciting. You got to look ahead and be like, yeah,
Absolutely.
what does 2030 bring?
The definition of career success is waking up every morning excited about what you get to do that day,
Yeah.
whatever it is. But that's so much more important than a lot of the other metrics that define career success. And so I think a lot of people have a chance to have some pretty successful careers because we're just getting started with the design innovation and the experiences and things that are going to spin out of the maturing and emerging technology that's taking place right now.
Yeah, it's exciting. That's what it is again, yeah, the podcast. It's terrifying being your own boss. I totally and fully understand now people that just keep a 9 to 5. I'm like, I totally respect and appreciate like stability because this is the opposite of that. The inverse, though, man, it's exciting. It is like, what does it bring next? And I think that's in general kind of how we should view it. But got to wrap this up for now. I was gonna say, and I'll send it to you as well. A great World War I history is by Dan Carlin, and it's actually a podcast. There's 6 episodes, 4 hours each, called Blueprints for Armageddon. It is, if you like anything about World War II, it's better. It's almost, I think it might be better than any book I've ever read. It's that. So
Please send me that. That'd be
it
fantastic.
is
Yeah.
it'll melt your brain. But yeah, that had nothing to do with the rest of this. For everybody listening, please go in the description. You can go find the link to his book on Audible. I highly, highly recommend it. I will email you this when it is up later, and I look forward to the next one, man.
Thanks, Tommy. Feel
Mr.
free to
Burns.
reach out when you're ready to speak again.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, dude. Thank you so much for your time. Till next time.